Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Yam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtatara Sata Shishimati Divine Grace of Bhavichandra Ravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय। जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे। हरि हरि बोल। नमो विष्णु। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, Chapter number 5, Vidura's Talks with Maitreya, text number 8. Yas tattva vede radilokanatha lokan alokan saha lokapalan achiklipad yatra hit sarva sattva achiklapad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedho dikrita pratitha yastatva vedhair adilokanato lokan alokan saha lokapalan achiklipad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedo dikrita pratitah yaistatva vedair adilokanato lokan alokan saha lokapalan achiklipad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedho dikrita pratitah yastatva vedair adilokanato lokan alokan saha lokapalan
achiklipad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedo dikrita
pratitah yastatva vedair adilokanato lokan alokan saha lokapalan achiklipad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedo dikrita pratitah yastatva vedair adilokanato lokan alokan saha lokapalan achiklipad yatra hi sarva sattva nikaya vedo dikrita pratitah. Word for word. Yahi, by whom, tattva, truth, vedahi, by differentiation, adilokanataha, the king of the kings, lokan, planets, alokan, planets of the lower region, saha, along with, lokapalan, respective kings, achiklipat, planned, yatra, wherein, he, certainly, sarva, all, sattva, existence, nikaya, living entities, bedaha, difference, adikritaha, occupied, patitaha, it so appears. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhayacharya Aravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the Supreme King of all kings has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the modes of nature and work, and He has created their different kings and rulers. Purport: Lord Krishna is the chief king of all kings, and He has created different planets for all kinds of living entities. Even on this planet there are different places for inhabitation by different types of men. There are places like deserts, icelands and valleys in the mountainous countries, and in each of them there are different kinds of men born of different modes of nature according to their past deeds. There are people in the Arabian desert and the valleys of the Himalayan mountains, and the inhabitants of these two places differ from one another, just as the inhabitants of the Icelands also differ from them. Similarly, there are also different planets. The planets below the earth down to the Patala planet are full of various kinds of living beings. No planet is vacant, as wrongly imagined by the modern so-called scientist. In Bhagavad Gita we find it said by the Lord that the living entities are sarvagata, or present in every sphere of life. So there is no doubt that on the other planets there are also inhabitants like us, sometimes with greater intelligence and greater opulence. The living conditions for those of greater intelligence are more luxurious than on this earth. There are also planets where no sunlight reaches, and there are different living entities who must live there due to their past deeds. All such plans for living conditions are made by the Supreme Lord, and Vidura requested Maitreya to describe this for the sake of further enlightenment. Translation again: the Supreme King of all kings has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the modes of nature and work, and He has created their different kings and rulers. Om Jnanatimurandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we're continuing Vidura's talks with Maitreya, and in this verse we're reading, or this section we're reading about how Vidura approaches Maitreya and out of humility asks very common questions for common men. Rather than immediately going to Maitreya and asking about Krishna and his pastimes directly, he's asking about the Lord's creation, maintenance and destruction of the material world for the benefit of all common men and out of his own humility. So we're hearing about how Vidura actually has knowledge of the Lord's creative functions, but he is asking Maitreya for the benefit of all living entities, so that Maitreya can further expand on what he had heard from Lord Krishna just after the Prabha-kshetra. So then what happens here is that Vidura is now asking about, just as the Lord creates the universe, he's then talking about how he populates the different universes. So just before this yesterday, we were reading about how the Lord incarnates for the welfare of the twice-born, the cows and the demigods. And he says our minds are never satisfied completely, although we continuously hear of his transcendental activities. So these are all the activities of the Lord we're hearing about. Even creation of the world is done by his Purusha avatars. So the Lord is known as Adi Lokanatha. In Chaitanya Charitamrita we read about how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that Lord Krishna is known as Trayadish. He is the master of the three. And there we hear about how he's the master of the three worlds. He's master of the Vrindavan, Mathura and Dwarka. And we also know that he is a master of the Purusha avatars, Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, Kshirodakashaya Vishnu and Karandakashaya Vishnu. So he's the master of the threes. In fact, it's mentioned here, Prabhupada says that he's the chief king of all kings. Mahaprabhu again, he mentions this pastime of how Lord Brahma, our Lord Brahma, four-headed Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, had approached Dwarka to visit Lord Krishna. And there he came across the two doormen of Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna. And they didn't allow him in straight away. And they asked him, "Who are you?" And Lord Brahma said, "What do you mean, who am I? I am Lord Brahma." And so they asked you, "Please wait one moment, we will go and check with our master." And so a messenger was sent to Lord Krishna, and Lord Krishna was informed that Brahma was here. And smiling Krishna asked him, "Ask him which Brahma." And so then when the messenger came back, then they asked the visitor, our four-headed Brahma. So the Lord is asking which Brahma. And Lord Brahma is thinking, "What do you mean which Brahma? I'm the only Brahma." So then he was again given the permission or granted permission of darshan of the Lord. And when he appeared before the Lord, he offered his prayers, fell like a rod before the Lord and offered his prayers to the Lord. And there at that time he asked the Lord, "My dear Lord, if you may allow me to ask you one question, how come you asked which Brahma am I?" And so there immediately Lord Krishna manifested within Brahma's vision all different Brahmas of all the other different universes coming and taking darshan of the Lord. And they had many different types, numbers of heads. Some had millions, some had hundreds of millions, and so on. And they all came and they paid obeisances at the Lord's lotus feet. And it's mentioned when they all paid obeisances at the Lord's lotus feet, their helmets were clanging together. So you can understand there was many heads. And so then when the Lord received them, each one didn't know that the other was there. So each one thought that only they were there before the Lord. A similar pastime happens when the Lord's running just before the Lord, what is the word? He chastises Agasura. There he's running through the forest with his cowherd boys. And each one thinks that I will go and approach Krishna first. So as Lord Krishna goes forward, each one of the cowherd boys all run after him, attempting to have a competition to who will touch him first. And obviously each one of them touch him. In the Ras Leela, then we also read of how each gopi saw Krishna with her alone. So in the same way, Lord Krishna was manifest to these Brahmas, and these Brahmas weren't able to see each other except for our four-headed Brahma. And seeing this, our four-headed Brahma was shocked and understood the potency of the Lord. So the Lord is known as Trayadish and is known as Adi Lokanatha, that he is the master of all. In fact, he is master of not just our universe, where Lord Brahma is here, our four-headed Brahma, but he's the master of all universes, the whole material cosmic manifestation, as well as the spiritual manifestation coming from his internal potency. So he has created different types of planets for different kinds of living entities. Because of the living entities' rebellious nature to want to enjoy separately from Lord Krishna. Prabhupada says actually that the living entities in this material world have a facility to enjoy their senses, hoping to enjoy separately from Krishna. So the problem of material nature is that it is an energy of Krishna, but we have taken it to be a separate energy of the Lord. That, okay, the Lord has his own spiritual abode, and now we have this material energy. That's for the Lord, and this is for us. Prabhupada says in the morning walk, when he's walking down, he sees children playing in the playground, and he sees the skyline of the city. And there Prabhupada says, he points with his cane, and he says, this is a children's playground. And then he points to the skyline and he says this is a big children's playground, right? So this is our unfortunate situation. Just like the mother will give the child a play set to mimic and imitate the cooking process, similarly the Lord has given us this material world and the external energy completely covers us and makes us completely illusioned, thinking that we are exploiting material nature as if we are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here, Prabhupada's making the emphasis that the Lord has created different planets for different kinds of living entities. Why? Not because the Lord wanted to do it out of His own accord, but simply to satisfy the rebellious living entities who out of their free will have decided to go against the Lord's wishes and enjoy their own senses rather than satisfying the Lord's senses. And that's where the complication begins, because once you introduce this separatist mentality, then the Lord has to also create different activities. He has to create the modes of nature. And Prabhupada says here, different kinds of men born are different modes of nature according to their past deeds. So the Lord has to create the system, and He has to create also the system in such a way that it will always remember your activities in the material world, so that you'll be able to be given the facilities to enjoy according to your past deeds and desires. So the Lord, He is, Prabhupada says, extremely merciful, because actually nothing can happen without the Lord's sanction. So if we desire something small, out of our puffed up nature, we think it's happening because of our desire. But actually the Lord is sanctioning it. And if you think about it, the Lord's within the heart as Antaryami and has been traveling with us for many, 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 many lifetimes. And if you think about it, the Lord is traveling with us through different bodies. So these different types of planets and the different types of bodies to inhabit those planets, we've been through them all. And we've been through them all with Krishna. But unfortunately, as the Upanishads mention, that the body is like a tree, and the soul and the super soul like birds in the tree. But the super soul is the bird that simply witnesses, whereas the soul is the bird that enjoys the fruits of the tree. And there are two types of tastes that he gets: happiness and distress. These are the two fruits that he eats and the tastes he gets, and he simply tries to enjoy them in the company or under the guidance, witness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna is constantly waiting for the living entity to turn to him. Constantly waiting, when will you give up this illusory struggle for material existence, hoping to be happy here, and then engage once again in my loving devotional service. So the Lord is waiting for many countless lifetimes, waiting for us to turn to Him and come back to Him. But all the time He's facilitating. Can you imagine that? The amount of compassion, the amount of patience the Lord has, the amount of determination He has, waiting for us to once again take His shelter. That He's waiting countless lifetimes for us to remember and not forget Him. But rather we are continuously choosing to forget Him, choosing to ignore Him. And so He has to facilitate that. The person that we love the most, the person that is the most beloved, has to facilitate us to forget Him. It's a very difficult position to be in if we think about it. Can you imagine how much Krishna has to go through and how much he has to maintain the living entities so that they'll come back to him? But Prabhupada says he's like the loving father. And although we are rich men's sons and daughters, we have forgotten that. And so we are then squandering this asset and facility of the Lord. Rather than using it in His service, we've run away from the Lord, forgotten our original nature, and struggling in the material world, pretending to be orphans. And in that difficult situation, we are going through different planetary systems, up and down, all the way up to Brahmaloka, all the way down to Patalaloka. When Vyasadeva was talking to Narad Muni in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, there Narad Muni tells Vyasadeva, the cause of your despondence is that you have not properly glorify the name, form, qualities and pastimes of the Lord. But there he has also mentioned that all the literature that you have written will misguide the living entity to perform karma kanda or pious activities without relationship with the Lord. And there he mentions that an intelligent, self-realized person should understand that regardless of going up to the topmost planet Brahmaloka, or even traversing down to the lowest planetary system Patalaloka, still happiness and distress will come of its own accord. Just as distress comes, so will happiness. So they will not endeavor for it extraneously. Rather, they will just simply endeavor for self-realization, spiritual consciousness. So that's the instruction given by the exalted souls, that we are to engage in Krishna's loving devotional service rather than rotating in this planetary system up and down. Here Prabhupada mentions that he gives the various different facilities or environments, the Arabian deserts, the valleys of the Himalayan mountains, deserts, icelands. And he's mentioning in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says that the living entities are sarvagata, that they are all pervading. And Prabhupada clarifies that all pervading doesn't mean that it's some sort of vague energy that pervades and becomes impersonal. Rather, all pervading means the living entity all exist throughout the universe. Prabhupada gives the example when on a morning walk. He sees grass growing in between cracks in the cement. And Prabhupada saying, just see, living entities are growing from every single place. As soon as there's opportunity, living entities growing from there. So they are saying that the universe is vacant and planets are vacant. How is that logically possible? So, just as there's the super soul present without the universe, also there's the function or facility for the living entity to also associate with the Lord in that way, along with the Lord in every corner of this universe. And Prabhupada is saying, yes, they may enter into the heavenly planets, or they may enter into the lower planetary system where there's no sunlight. Sometimes when I read this, I always think Prabhupada is saying here that there are planets where no sunlight reaches, and there are living entities who must live there due to their past deeds. So a sane person will understand that this is actually a very torturous condition to be in. Right? If you think about some of the things they do to rectify prisoners, one of them is solitary and confinement. And that is that they put the prisoner in a very dark cell for many, many, many days. And all the living entity in that particular living cell experiences is just darkness. No sunlight whatsoever, no association. They just simply associate with their minds and sometimes go crazy because of that. So this is our general understanding. But unfortunately, if you have a look at this material world, there are so many facilities for living entities to enjoy in the dark. Simply to enjoy in the dark. And when you try to explain this to living entities, they'll think, oh, just another place to go and enjoy. Which is the unfortunate state of affairs in Kali Yuga. But Prabhupada's mentioning that past deeds that one performs to attain that particular place is quite horrendous. It's a very bad situation to be in. Prabhupada explains another example, that once a Christian priest was preaching the gospel and had entered into the mines, and this is in relation to how preachers are able to adjust the details and maintains the principles to teach living entities regardless of their situation. So then he goes and meets the miners, and he tells the miners that, you know, the hellish condition of life, hell is a very dark, damp place. It's a very difficult place to live in. And the miners are looking at each other and going, yeah, that's okay. It's not better than this. Must be a bit better than this. And so then he understood that it's not going to work. So then he says, there's no newspapers there. And Prabhupada says that the miners then say, oh, how hellish, how horrible. So Prabhupada says that, so the point here I'm trying to bring in is that the living entities being stuck, conditioned in a particular mode of nature, they enjoy a particular facility, and unfortunately due to the covering potency and the dragging potency of the Lord's illusory potency, they are not able to come out of it, so they're conditioned to it. And being conditioned to it, they perform pious and impious activities again and again and again, not knowing how to get out of it, and not wanting to get out of it because they have no knowledge of anything. So they simply rotate in material world in this way. So here Prabhupada mentions that point, that Sarvagata, they are present in every sphere of life. This idea or understanding of the Lord in relation to the living entities and the material nature is a very important subject matter, because it helps us understand the nature of the material world and helps us become detached from it. My spiritual master often says that if he was given the chance, he would continue reading Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita again and again. But he makes sure to read Srimad Bhagavatam and Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Because reading Srimad Bhagavatam and Srimad Bhagavad Gita, many people have the idea that, it's just philosophy, there's no much pastimes, it just talks about creation, maintenance and destruction of the universe. But actually that is also pastimes of the Lord. Just as Prabhupada mentions in the first verse of Bhagavad Gita in his lectures, that many people say that, what's the point of reading or hearing about Krishna's pastimes on the battlefield? Better to hear Ras Leela. But then Prabhupada says actually the devotees of the Lord understand that anything the Lord performs is absolute. Any activity the Lord performs is absolute. So his activities on Kurukshetra are equally as relishable as that performed in the Rasamandala in Vrindavan. So the Lord's activities are like that. So these pastimes of the Lord in his maintenance, annihilation and creation, they are also to be read and heard. It's mentioned that in Srimad Bhagavatam by Sanatana Goswami that every syllable of Srimad Bhagavatam is saturated with Krishna Prem. And it is constantly read by those liberated personalities who are constantly engaged in the Lord's loving devotional service. So in that way we should not neglect hearing and reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, one thing I wanted to also mention that came to mind, it's a little side point, but something we can also appreciate, that the Lord creates all of these different places of habitation for the living entities because of the necessity or the need the living entity wants. Practically because the living entity wants it. They have a particular desire, they've associated with the modes of nature in a certain way, and so therefore their body has been created in such a way that they can enjoy such desires. And therefore there's a facility created. But actually, here Prabhupada is saying that there is no doubt in other planets there's also inhabitants like us, and eventually. Because with greater intelligence and greater opulence comes the greater responsibility of engaging in Krishna's service. If we go against that, then we see repercussions very clearly in our lives. The first thing Krishna will do is take away such opulence because it becomes an obstacle in the path of devotional service. And when that obstacle is taken away, we are taught the lesson. We have to take our slice of humble pie. So the Lord makes sure for the devotees that happens. So the point here, Prabhupada mentions that the living entities have a need and a facility, and are given a facility by the Lord. I was recently reading in Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto of how Akrura visits Vrindavan. And there, just before he meets Krishna and Balaram on the cowherd pasturing grounds, there it's mentioned a particular verse. I think it's the second verse of the 39th chapter, or 38th chapter. No, 39th chapter. And there, Sukadev Goswami mentions how the Lord receives Akrura. Both their lordships, Shri Krishna Balaram, they both receive Akrura just as he had envisioned, just as he had meditated on. And he had meditated on the Lord embracing him and asking him, "Oh uncle, how have you been? How has your travel been? How are my relatives?" How he would come and make him seated. In fact, if you read that section, I was surprised. The way Akrura meditated on the Lord receiving him is the exact same way in which we perform our Archana service to the Lord. We invite the Lord to sit down, we give him some water, we give him madhuparka, honey mixed with milk, and we offer some praises of the Lord. It's a very interesting that the Lord is offering it to his devotee and Akrura is meditating on this as well. But Akrura is performing his devotional service as the uncle of Lord Krishna. That is the particular ras he shares with Lord Krishna. Just before that, when Narad Muni appears before the Lord, actually later in Dwarka pastimes, when the Lord bathes Narad Muni's feet, when he appears in the palaces, Narad Muni didn't just simply jump up and say, "Whoa, just don't touch my feet." He understood that this is the Lord's pastimes and that he's teaching the world how to take care or how to worship the Brahmanas, because the Lord was taking up the role as a human being, a Kshatriya. Anyway, coming back to Akrura, there straight after that Shukadev Goswami mentioned a verse. I don't remember ever reading it before, but it was very interesting. It's very similar to Kapila Dev's in one of his instructions in the 3rd canto. There he's mentioning that for those who satisfy the Lord, what more do they want? There's no hankering they have. Nahi vanchanti kinchana. They have no longer any desire for anything more. For having once satisfied the Lord, they no longer wish to have anything from the Lord. So there, it's mentioned specifically, let's see, prasane shriniketane, that they have for those who have satisfied the Lord, who is the master of the goddess of fortune, for them, na tatapi para rajan, there's nothing more that they want. Tatapi para, there's nothing beyond that. They do not seek anything beyond, other than continuing their service with the Lord. So you can see there's a complete juxtaposition here, the complete opposites side of the coin. We have in the material universe the living entities desiring and wanting so much more. But whereas the devotees, they're desireless. And Prabhupada says, I like this section, it's the last chapter of the second chapter, last verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Prabhupada says, real desirelessness. Prabhupada says, real desirelessness. That people think to be desireless means to become void, to become impersonal, to not exist. But Prabhupada says, real desirelessness means to simply desire what Krishna wants. It's not one's own personal desires. So this is the modus operandi of the devotee. This is their core principle of life. Whatever the Lord wants, wherever He wants it, they will do it. Whereas the living entities are constantly being battered by the mind, going through bhoga and tyaga. I want this, no, I don't want it now, I want that. And constantly go through shitoshna sukha dukkada. They simply go through, battered both sides. And so we think that that is happiness, and for any little amount of distress, we will engage in such happiness. Yesterday, reading from Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada says that Krishna is the giver of all salvation, to especially his enemies. That every single enemy of the Lord that he had killed immediately got salvation. And Rupa Goswami, I've heard in many classes, and Prabhupada mentions also, I think who was it? Ramai Maharaj also mentioned that actually when Jay and Vijay went through the different births according to the curses of the Chaturasana, the 4 Kumaras, it's mentioned that only after they were killed by Lord Krishna did they attain salvation. But rather they had to go, because of their mentality of approaching the Lord. It is only to the extent that they understood, like for example Shishupal. It's very interesting that it also very, very much matches this point. He denied the fact that Krishna was the king of all kings. And he, blasphemed the Lord. And it's mentioned that although he was blaspheming the Lord, Saraswati was also giving a second meaning to everything he was saying. Just as Jarasandha was also blaspheming the Lord, he was given that sort of secondary meaning. So Shishupal was doing the same thing. But when Shishupal died, he understood that Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was before him. And he had attained salvation in that way. So for the devotees, however, okay, I'll come back. The reason why I explained that was because in the material world, Prabhupada mentions that in that particular section, that Krishna is the one who gives apavarga. There's pavarga, which means the entanglement or the miseries of the material world, and apavarga, transcending such miseries or liberation. And Prabhupada says that the living entities go through 5 different types of distresses. That that parishram, they work very hard. And then there's fena, and then there's bhai, fear, and then there's bhiti also. Bhiti is fear, and bhanda is there in bondage, and finally Prabhupada says that there's mrityu, death, mriti. So the living entities go through these 5 pavargas, but Krishna gives apavarga. He gives liberation. And the reason why I was saying this section of Akrura, where Sukadev Goswami is saying that once one has satisfied the Lord, there's no need, there's no other anything else, any other benediction he requires. Nothing more does he want. He's completely satisfied. So the way it goes is, what more does a devotee want once they've satisfied the Supreme Personality of Godhead? What more do they desire? They do not desire anything more. And so Kapila Muni says that he gives liberation. He gives the 5 types of liberation: Salokya, Sarashti, Samipya, Sarupya, and Sayujya. But the devotees don't want any of that. They just simply want to engage in the service of the Lord. So you can understand this is the difference between a conditioned living entity and that of one who's liberated. That the liberated living entity wants to simply engage in the Lord's service. It may be here, it may be in the lower planetary system. Prabhupada says the typewriter, whether it's here or in a lower planetary system, it will continue to typewrite. Similarly, the devotee, whether he's up in the heavenly planetary systems or in the lower planetary systems, unaffected by material nature, he will continue to serve the Lord wholeheartedly in pure devotional service. So this is what we are aspiring for. And you can understand, without understanding the nature of the material world, we cannot understand the exalted nature of Krishna's loving devotional service. Otherwise, we'll just simply take it as another material activity. But by reading about material nature and the nature of the material world, dukkhalayam ashashvatam, and understanding how temporary the material world is, but in relation understanding the spiritual world, that's another thing Prabhupada mentions, that these statements in Nectar of Devotion describing the qualities of the Lord, they are just simply given to us. Although the Lord's qualities is like an ocean, it is unfathomable. Length and the breadth cannot be calculated. Still, these simple little statements give us an idea of the Lord's qualities. In the same way, this gives us an idea just by understanding by understanding material nature, just what the Lord has created. You can get some glimpse or idea of what the spiritual world can be like. All the varieties are present here are limited, but the varieties existing in the spiritual world, they are much more greater. So with this we can take to heart that what we will read next in Srimad Bhagavatam is also very important, and we can understand how merciful the Lord is in giving us these facilities to be able to enjoy in different planets, but has specifically given us His devotional service. Although we are not qualified for it, but by the mercy of the devotees of the Lord, especially Srila Prabhupada, we are reading about material nature which we would never have any idea of, and we're getting access into devotional service which we never get opportunity of in Kali Yuga. By the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we have been given Srimad Bhagavatam and the devotional service of the Lord, so we're very thankful. I will end here. Are there any questions, any comments? Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you so much for wonderful devotion Bhagavatam.
Hare Krishna.
My question is, one day when we think about that Krishna is very high and is traveling to the different bodies. And also in Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada said, even if an ordinary person comes and tells us that I'm happy to take all your liabilities, all your miseries, don't worry about it, I'm fully responsible for everything, and just surrender to that person. And Krishna, the Prabhupada saying Krishna is telling us that I'm taking your full responsibility over them. So what is stopping us, and how can we demonstrate our surrender to Krishna? How can we be submissive to Krishna? How can we please Krishna? How can we make our life successful?
Actually, Krishna is always maintaining us. We just don't recognize it, that's our problem. We're in ignorance and we lack faith that Krishna will do it. But actually, the funny thing is that Krishna is always maintaining us. Prabhupada says in the previous purport that the elephant is getting its food and the ant is also getting its food. So Krishna is maintaining us, whether we're here in ignorance or whether we're in full knowledge of us. We're always under the maintenance of Krishna. But in terms of how do we recognize that, that is the process of devotional service. Prabhupada saying in an initiation lecture in Los Angeles, I think 1969 or 70, there Prabhupada saying that we are in a diseased state of consciousness, and that by chanting this Hare Krishna mantra, we'll come to the platform of perfection. But it's not that we immediately should expect perfection. We are in the convalescent stage, Prabhupada says. That is, we are slowly getting rid of the disease. So we are in a position of where slowly we're understanding how Krishna is the chief king of all kings and that he's the maintainer. But also, unfortunately, we have got so much baggage. So therefore, generally, the easiest answer to this question is to get the association of devotees who understand, who have wholeheartedly dedicated their lives and their energies in serving Krishna. Because by the association of such devotees, as we see in the example of Narad Muni coming in contact with the Mahabhagavats, the Bhaktivedantas, yeah. So after meeting them and taking their remnants and hearing from them, then he was able to perfect his life as boy Narada. We also see that in Bharat Maharaj's case. In Bharat Maharaj, when he became a deer, he sought out the association of learned sages in the forest. And there he then refined and perfected his devotional service, and then took birth as Jada Bharat, and he was able to attain perfection that way. So by the association of devotees, we should never, minimize or diminish. By the association of devotees, simply by hearing them, those who have strong faith and conviction in the Lord and in His Sankirtan mission, those persons, by hearing them, we also develop faith in the Lord and practice devotional service. In fact, recently I remember meeting a person. He had come to devotional service. He's practicing devotional service, and he came and met Devamrita Maharaj. And it was funny because when he met him, he explained his situation, talked to Maharaj and everything like that. And Maharaj gave him guidance and everything like that. So then after that he came out, and I was asking him, yeah, it was really nice to have association of a saintly person and everything. But then he was saying, it's a general thing in the heart that we expect from saintly persons. But I was expecting a bit more practical, more instruction on how I can realize this knowledge. So I was telling him that actually, yeah, I had the same idea. But what was interesting was when I reflected on that, was that the instructions that we get from our spiritual master, from Srila Prabhupada, they're very simple, but they're like the key that allows us to access the knowledge. Because it's mentioned that you cannot understand, no one can understand Krishna of their own accord. It is only when He wants to let you understand Him, He will allow. But the problem is that we have shown Krishna distrust for so many lifetimes. Krishna is waiting to see that trust in Him. So when the devotee comes, the devotee gives us a special backdoor access. And by taking shelter of the devotee's lotus feet, then Krishna gives us the extra mercy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives us the extra mercy. So basically the answer is, by associating with devotees, we can again revive our faith, our trust, and reduce all the doubts we have in our heart, and come to understand how Krishna is the maintainer. Hare Krishna. Yes.
You know the point you mentioned about us analyzing the material world or understanding the futility of being materialistic persons. How do we see that understanding and analysis in line with, let's say, going into serving Krishna selflessly without any desire? Because one may argue, you end up going to Krishna just because you have nothing else. Material world, obviously everything is like so bad. That's where you're going.
Yep.
How do we justify, actually, that's not the reason why we go?
Actually, from our point of view, we can only see that materialists are also always defeated, regardless of their endeavors to perform material activities, that they may be so-called successful, but for how much, how long? We can understand from that perspective. So understanding the futility of material nature allows us to reject it, to become detached, but not reject in the sense that we don't use it. For our senses we reject, but for Krishna's we engage. So from that perspective you can understand. But in terms of explaining it to someone new who comes to you and says such a thing, I'd explain it that way. To that person I would explain that, look, material activities themselves, even the activities you perform, how many become successful? How many are come to fruition? And when it does come to fruition, how are you satisfied? Are you happy? So you can understand from that understanding that actually when people say that you've become, actually Prabhupada says in one lecture that actually because you're a failure in material life, now you become successful in Krishna consciousness. So actually when people say you failed in material life, that's actually the real thing. Regardless of how people see success, in the end everyone has simply failed. Because what is really success? The idea of success is to be happy. But are they really happy? Are they satisfied? No. And if they say that, you've taken up Krishna consciousness because you failed in material existence, that is the most intelligent thing to do. Because Krishna consciousness will give you that which you're struggling so hard for material nature, material existence that material nature will not give. Is there any other way that can be explained?
One way is to actually, I was just thinking when we were talking, if tells us because you don't have anything in the material world, that's why you're actually going to Krishna, not because of your love. We can argue that saying, forget about what we think. It's Krishna who's saying, this is Dukalaya Mashajakam, give it up and come to me. That was because what we are doing. But actually speaking, like many scriptures, a couple of there says, my devotees after they engage in my devotional service, they don't even bother about putting this world.
Yeah.
Because the focus is not liberation. So we can argue that way.
Yep.
That we worship Krishna because Krishna asks us to give up, so we give up.
Right. Okay.
But service of Krishna itself, the proof that this is still selfless service is that devotees are not too eager to quit the world and go. They are too eager to continue their service.
Yep.
And we can quote a couple of their instructions there.
Right.
I would like to share something. My Shishus in India, they say, that in the beginning the family right disappointed when they shake their heads and start practicing. 20 years later, they said, out of all the children, you're the most wonderful ones. It just took time to realize that, like, they were just seeing how much my Shishus have progressed in the name of fame also, respect also. Just act like Prabhupada said, just say with this struggle, get paid, you get everything, without even asking for it. And then if we go away from us, even when we're not doing anything, it comes and then it sounds practical example in my Shisha where it's great glorious.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says the most famous person is the devotee.
Yeah.
So what did you say?
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says to Ramananda, who is the most famous person in the world? Then he says devotees. Devotees are the most famous people.
Actually, it's funny because devotees, whatever we endeavor for so hard in material existence, it's so illusory, it's not there. But if you see the devotee has it, but he doesn't care about it. Krishna has given all facility, the same facility that we hankered for in material existence. But right now, when you come to that consciousness, according to the level of consciousness, Krishna gives that facility to the extent that you know how to use it, engage it back in his service. So it reminds me of that section how Krishna says, I'm not a fool. I'll satisfy their desires in such a way that they'll never want it again. Thank you very much for listening. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Patita Pavana Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Nithai Gaur Premanande.